Thank you so much for allowing me to chat at you today. I will share, I am having a slight technical issue, and I have my notes here on my iPad. You can't see it off my screen, but I'm watching the chat. And if you have a question, I'm a therapist. I'm much more comfortable listening than I am talking. So if you have questions, please, first of all, feel free to unmute yourself and say, hey, you know, tell me about this. But also it's fine to also, if you're more comfortable, post them in the chat. I prepared this, and we're gonna talk for about, I'm gonna talk, hopefully not for the full 90 minutes, hopefully you'll jump in there, but we're gonna talk a little bit about the epidemiology. I know you started there last week with the resilience movie, but a lot has sort of come to light that I think it's crucial for us to kind of put it in even better perspective. And then we're gonna talk a lot about the brain, and then we're gonna end with just some really simple interventions that you do not have to be a therapist to help folks who are struggling. So I hope that that covers what everyone's needs for today were, but if it isn't, please pop a question in the chat. I'll do my best to answer it, and if I can't answer it, I promise I'll get back to you. So let's see here, changing our slide. Uh-oh. Sorry. Okay, so the first most important thing is to talk about why is it important for us to talk about trauma and ACEs. And I know you watched the resilience movie, which every time I watch it, I always get like this heavy feeling afterwards. Like it's so sad about all this stuff coming up. And even though it is crucial that we kind of lance the boil and we've got to go and we got to get in there and go after some of this, it's tough to face this. So I am really grateful that people are here on their free time to talk a little bit about traumas. And the reason why this is important is that if you want to have a sustainable community, you have to make sure that the people are sustainable. And this means healing trauma. I am going to embarrass myself trying to pronounce this gentleman's name, but his Jurumbi Githambul, and he is part of the native Aboriginal tribes in Australia who have actually, the Australians have done a ton of work on trauma and ACEs, not ACEs specifically, but trauma. They have done a lot to get out into the Aboriginal communities to try to address some of this. Some successfully, some not, but the important thing is that they're continuing to work on that and try. But what are we talking about when we talk about trauma? And I know you had some definitions with the movie last week, but really the definition of trauma in terms of what we're going to talk about today is the more that you, the person who is either the victim or the receiver of a terrifying situation, you believe that you are endangered, the more traumatized you'll be. Psychologically, the bottom line of trauma is overwhelming emotion and a feeling of utter helplessness. There might or might not be bodily injury. That's key because oftentimes this is an invisible injury. But psychological trauma is coupled with physiological upheaval that plays a leading role in the long range effects. And there's a lot of words, but I felt it was important to start with one of the experts. But really the bottom line here is this: trauma is defined by the experience of the survivor. We, as an outside person, if we were all in the same room, which we would do if I was in the same room with you, we're not, but let's imagine for a second that we're all in one of the lecture halls in SUNY Cortland, and somebody comes in and they shoot me, all of you would have a very different reaction to that. And the reason, I think everyone will initially be very frightened. There might be some chaos, there might not, but afterwards, some people might be traumatized for quite some time, and other people might go, well, that was really sad and upsetting, but I'm getting on with my life. And there is no wrong way to respond to an incident, but it is crucial for us to really understand the perspective of the person or people who are affected by something, because every single person is going to have a different reaction to the situation. So let's talk about some examples of what we're really talking about. We're not just talking about big, scary events, but we might be talking about feeling unloved or uncared for, receiving little family support, basic needs not being met, food, clothing, shelter. One we often miss is bathing, especially with kiddos. When I go into schools and I talk with teachers about this, I say, we can't look past, Johnny comes to school every day and he's dressed and he's got a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but some kids, there's a lot of shame around not being able to bathe. And so I think it's important for us to acknowledge that piece of it. Kids just, if you don't feel good about yourself, you're not going to be able to go and learn and do the stuff that you need to do. Parents being separated or divorced, sexual abuse, that's an obvious one, verbal abuse or fear of harm, physical abuse, interpersonal violence in the home. That may mean violence between their parents, but it also could be violence between, an aunt and uncle who come over to the house or somebody else. If there's fighting, fighting between a parent and another sibling. Lots of ways that there can be interpersonal violence in a home. You don't have to be the recipient of abuse to be affected by the fear of what's going on. Having a family member who is depressed, mentally ill, or has suicide attempts, those things don't just affect the person who is suffering, but it also affects their families. And having a family member in prison. Now, I know you all saw Resilience, so the spoiler is what I'm talking about are ACEs. And ACEs is a study, it's the largest longitudinal study in the United States. It was started by two doctors. I know you heard a little bit about it in the movie, but between 1995 and 1997, there were 2 waves of data collection, and 17,000 HMO members from Southern California were given a very simple 10-question survey to check off their experiences as a young person and a really quick questionnaire in terms of what is going on with their physical health currently. And this was kicked off because doctors got curious and said, what's going on? And I think, it's important for us when we start to get curious, we start asking questions because we learn more. So, the study has kicked off. However, this study has taken off like wildfire. And in the 25 years, wow, that's a long time, since 1995, almost all 50 states have a ACEs study currently going on concurrently year to year. Different states are doing it differently. But what we are looking at this point, and these numbers hold pretty much as we're moving forward, but somewhere around 59% of the population has at least one ACE. 24% roughly has one, 2, 13%, 3, 8%, and 4 or more, 14%. Now, looking at this, these questions are so crucial to ask because knowing that people have experienced trauma or been exposed to trauma, changes the way that life moves forward. It not only changes their brains, it not only affects their mental health, but it also affects their physiology. And what we find is people who've been exposed to ACEs are real possibility of developing all sorts of physiological issues. And I know we heard someone's working on some obesity work and study in children, and things like that. Like this absolutely falls into that wheelhouse. All of us, especially 2020, let's talk about it. Like many of us are self-medicating with food because wow, we can't go out, we can't be to friends. I can have some Ben and Jerry's or whatever. So this is one of the things that I'm really excited, and this is actually a brand new ACEs pyramid that just came out from the CDC. The old one, I used to call it the spiraling pyramid of death. It still is not very cheery, but what I'm really excited about is that it has included 2 lower levels on the pyramid that I think have been sorely lacking and missing as we've been looking at ACEs, because it's crucial, so former sociology major here, that we look at things in context. And generational embodiment and historical trauma are 2 crucial pieces that I think, although most people who talk about ACEs, we tend to acknowledge them or give them lip service, but I am very excited that this is being acknowledged as the very bottom part of this pyramid on which everything else is built, because we need to be looking at things like generational poverty. We need to be looking at things like racism in the United States. We need to be looking at disenfranchised groups of people. we need to look at, you know, historical trauma, because just saying, oh, you know, something, your parents got divorced when you're a kid, like that denies a generational history that is crucial for us to be talking about. And then above that, it talks about social conditions and local context. I know that I have some native Cortlandites. I grew up in Homer. And what I'll say is, you know, there is a lot of generational poverty in this community. And I have a grandfather who says, you know, the Depression never left Cortland. We had a little blip for a little while with some manufacturing, but really it's been pretty rough run. And so I think that it's important to look at a local context as well, because certainly if I was, you know, Native American, or I was a Black person, my experience in Cortland County would be very different than perhaps mine as a, you know, a white person. And then on top of that, we start to talk about ACEs. And so I think that context that's been added is really important. And then we start looking at what is more my area of what we're going to talk about today. Is we look at disrupted neurodevelopment, meaning that children, especially very young children who are exposed to ACEs, their neurodevelopment, their brains do not develop in the same way that children who have not been exposed to ACEs develop. And that can lead, now realizing, I want to be careful here, it is a pyramid, which means these things can happen, but it is not necessarily destiny. And I think that that's a really important piece for us to acknowledge. We can talk about building resilience. We can work on changing our brains at any time. I would not spend my life being a therapist if I didn't believe that. So we have to look at these things, our possibilities of what's happening. So disruptive neurodevelopment can lead to social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. Those can lead to adoption of health risks and behaviors. And those things can lead to disease, disability, and social problems. And for people who really, really don't get help and are really, really struggling, this can lead to early death. And I don't want to downplay that. At the same time, I don't want to overplay that these are just some of the possibilities of what can happen. So just like so many things, you know, we talk about autism, early intervention, we talk about speech, early intervention, we talk about, you know, kids with all sorts of, you know, learning struggles, we talk about early intervention. The same thing is true for ACEs. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the struggles with implementing some of the ACEs screening, but I think there's some ways for us to get to it. The one thing I want to state here, and I think it's kind of obvious, is that females and racial and ethnic minority groups are at a greater risk for experiencing 4 or more ACEs. You know, like so very many things, you know, it depends on, you know, where you're born as part of your destiny, and your the color of your skin affects that, and your social economic status affects that, and this is no different. That being said, the ACEs data does show that you can go through the data with putting any different factor in terms of ethnicity, social economic status, education. ACEs affect all of us, regardless of whether or not where we stand in the social pyramid. That being said, people who tend to be at higher risk for other things tend to be higher risk for ACEs. And the other thing that I'm not qualified to talk about the health pieces, I'm not a doctor, but people who are exposed to ACEs that's associated with an increased risk for health problems across the lifespan. We're not just talking about mental health issues, that's where I will spend most of my time focusing today, but also for health-related issues. And of course, the truth is, our brain is part of our body. And so, of course, if our brain is affected, so is the rest of your body. I laugh a little bit. When I went to graduate school many years ago, in the late 90s, we used to talk about the mind-body connection. And I just laugh at that now because, like, of course your brain, of course your mind's connected to the rest of your body. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But at the time, it was very, you know, a little woo-woo, but hopefully we're moving away from that. So let's talk a little bit about some local data. And I will say that the local data is a little bit sparse. But I think it's important to talk about what we do have. So New York State, as I mentioned, like other states, has its own ACES study. It is called the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System. Nice, light, quick title for you. Also often called the BRFSS. And it consists of an annual statewide telephone survey. So, you know, a little bit in the dark side, or in the dark ages, but this is how we're collecting the data. And New York State's recent data reports that 59.3% of those surveyed report at least one ACE. The ACEs most reported in New York State were emotional abuse, 24.6%, parental separation at 23%, and substance abuse in the home at 22.2%. They do not break that data down by county, unfortunately. I really wish they did. I think Cortland would look a little bit different, but you know, we're only looking at a percentage or two depending on, you know, looking at the data. So I don't want to get too caught up in that, but I do think that that's a hole in our information. Locally in Cortland County, there, and John and Lindy and Doug, please jump in if I've got this wrong, but I could find two regular surveys. Neither of them specifically addresses ACEs, but the Cortland County Community Health Assessment and Improvement Plan, which I saw the 2019 to 2024. It's a 5-year plan developed by Cortland County Health Department, and that's in conjunction with Guthrie Cortland. And it looks at areas of community health, such as obesity, diabetes data, teen pregnancy, visits to the ER for asthma. It looks at some mental health metrics as well. And also the annual Cortland Area Communities That Care survey. They look at 1,400 7th through 12th grade students across all the schools in Cortland County. And it measures risk and protective factors to predict adolescent problem behaviors. From the results of the community survey, the community-wide programs which reduce risk factors and enhance protective factors can be created to support needs. So basically that data drives intervention. And again, while none of these looks at ACEs specifically, I frequently, and I'm not gonna do it today because we're online and I don't know how to do it confidentially, but so forgive me for that. But when I do these workshops, I often informally ask everybody to do their own ACEs. And what I find is that the numbers in the workshops where I am, and again, that's anecdotal, are a little higher. The number is somewhere around 65%, an average of roughly 65% of the people in an ACEs workshop in Cortland County report having at least one ACE. So locally, the number's a little higher. And you know, I think it is important for us to consider how we might collect data. There's issues with that. We're going to talk about it. But as a community, if we want to respond to this in a meaningful way, we do need to have a little bit more information than what we currently have. And I think that we might be able to look at early intervention things. We may look at schools. We may look at pediatricians. There's a number of different ways we might be able to gather some of that data. I think that our number one barrier to that is shame. And I think that it's really tough to ask people. People don't want to tell everybody about their history, especially when they're talking about their children. We wouldn't necessarily, you know, collecting data with children is next to impossible. I would not recommend that. But if we were looking at adults, there might be a way for us to address to get some more information. So I think we've talked about why data is important, but you know, oftentimes when I do ask groups at these various ACEs workshops, they often say, you know what, a lot of people have like a tragic backstory. Like, why do we want to do this? And you know, I think first of all, always knowledge is power. I also worry a little bit, especially this year. We've seen it. You can turn on any media of your choice, but there is a lot of toxic positivity around having a difficult story from the beginning, and that, oh, look, you know, you don't hear about the people whose life did not go well. You get to read the autobiography of someone who had a horrible childhood and then has risen above. And while I think those stories have great value, and I certainly am not putting down people for writing a book, that's fantastic, but I also think it's crucial for us to hear the stories about people who maybe are still struggling. and that we need to hear about people's struggles. Like oftentimes if you read those books, you get, chapters 1 through 10 are the horror story. Chapter 11 is, oh, I went to therapy and everything's okay now. And chapter 12 is like, yay, you can do it too. Like there's no, like, I want the meat and potatoes of things. And I think on some level, like the more that we start to talk about the problem and name the problem, the less scary it becomes, the more we pull energy away from it and say, okay, yeah, this stuff happened and we got to do something about it. I think it's really that simple. And maybe that's oversimplifying, but you're going to let me know. So let's talk about what we're really looking at. And this graphic right here, and I'm hoping you can see it okay. Unfortunately, I can't point to it, but we're going to look at person on the left and person on the right. Person on the left, it has a brain that is relatively healthy. And person on the right, these are children, by the way, these are kiddo scans. Person on the right has been exposed to trauma. The child on the left has a healthy brain with red regions showing lots of activity, and the blue regions are relatively limited. So, you see in the front and the back, brains form from back to front. So the bottom part is the back of the brain. That's this part here, and then to the front. So, the lower part of your brain systems, your autonomic system, which controls all the stuff that you can't control, body temperature, heart rate, your blood pressure, making sure that you're breathing when you're asleep, things like that. That's all autonomic system, fully formed when you're born. And your limbic system, which is our stress sensitive system, that's a system that deals with stress and the system that deals with our emotions. Oversimplified a little bit, but stay with me here. And then this on the top, this is the thinking part of the brain that you're looking at here. So red part of the brain, lots of activity, blue, relatively limited. So on the right, we see a kid, pretty well-formed brain, looks like lots of activity going on there. And crucially, that frontal part of their brain, both the temporal lobes, which are the two circles that you see in white, those are emotional regions. And then that whole front part of the brain that's all that red there, that's your prefrontal cortex. That's where judgment and the ability to regulate our emotions is. That's where we're able to work through a problem. We are able to organize, all those things that we want to be able to do to be our best selves. That's all prefrontal cortex in the brain. So this young person is well on their way to having to not struggling too much with their own brain. Unfortunately, kiddo on the right shows fewer red active regions in the brain. And more real estate is given to blue, low activity, and you can even see that there are parts in those temporal lobes that aren't showing any activity at all. So this kiddo is really struggling to regulate their senses and probably will have difficulty managing their emotions. And in their that prefrontal cortex that we're talking about, where judgment and all those executive functionings are, there's hardly any red. There's just a little bit right up in the front. So this is a really extreme example, and I apologize for using an extreme example because most kids fall on a spectrum. This is an extreme example, and kiddo on the left is as an example of a really healthy kid. Most of us are somewhere in the middle, but I do like to show this only because, we can't really show too many brain scans, and it's cool to have one. So the human brain is grown relationship, meaning relationally, which means it learns as it's exposed to events outside the body and attaches those memories to each other. So, you teach a kid, here's a stove, right? And you put a pot on the stove with water in it and you say, this is hot, right? And at some point, kiddo gets too close to the stove and they start to put their hand up, and what do? They feel it's hot, they put their hand away, right? That's learning. It's a really simplistic example, I apologize, but it is a good one. And, as we're attaching memories to each other. And neurons look like little trees that grow in the brain. They little branches branch off as you learn more things. And sometimes we go, oh, we're going to forget that. And so that branch is culled off and another branch is strengthened because, fractions are really important. And so we sort of strengthen other branches in the brain. The brain grows best when there are positive relationships and attachments formed, which keep the brain in learning mode rather than in survival mode. And this is where our ACEs enter the picture. So please forgive my poor art design skills. I'm a sociologist and a social worker. But again, this is a little bit of a depiction of what's going on socially with kiddo on the left and kiddo on the right. So again, same thing. So we're looking at the kiddo on the right with the brain with all the red, and, or excuse me, on the left. And minimal energy for this kiddo is spent on survival. Basic needs are being met. You know, every once in a while, mom might forget to pack a lunch and they have to eat PB&J at the babysitter, or, you know, they didn't wear a warm enough coat, but minimal energy is spent on survival. It maybe the family has a couple of struggles, but by and large, the kid is protected from those family stressors. Therefore, they're able to put more energy towards self-regulation, right? And, you know, even though we have famously debunked the marshmallow experiment, I do think that that is an experiment about self-control and regulation. And I agree with the debunking, by the way, very much so, because absolutely we didn't take things like ACEs into context. But I think it is important to realize that kids need to spend some brain time, some emotional thinking, you know, cognitive energy towards self-regulation. Because once we learn to regulate, then we can start to pick up those social and emotional skills. And those are, that's it, that's the money. Human beings are the most social animals on the planet. That is why we are all struggling so very much with all of the distancing we've had to do here this year, is that we need each other. We are connected to each other. We love to be around our fellow humans, even when they drive us crazy. There's a reason dysfunctional families stay together. They love each other. So the more that kids are able to build, they have this extra energy to spend on social and building social and emotional skills. And the wonderful thing about all this is that this kid walks into kindergarten and look at that blue box up at the top. They have all of that mental ability, energy ready to go for cognition. That means they're going to be able to learn to read. They're ready to learn to write. They might even know their ABCs by the time they walk into school. These kids are ready to learn. And you know, a lot of schools are talking about that. That is a buzzword, ready to learn. And so these kids have the skills to be able to sit in a classroom, attend to a teacher, be caring and concerned about their fellow table mates or their classmates. They're able to go out and function on the playground. Generally speaking, they're able to be a good citizen, so to speak, as much as we expect a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old to be a good citizen. Now, unfortunately, the pyramid is reversed for our child on the right. And this is our kid, again, back to, this is the kid on the right with a lot of blue sections in their brain scan. And what's happening is that an enormous amount of energy, enormous amount of cognition, enormous amount of personal resources are spent on survival. This child might be helping care for a sibling. They may there may not be enough food in the house. So literally they're not getting enough fat and good nutrition in their diet to build their brain. It may also be that there's the level of conflict in the home is so high that kids don't know how to self-regulate and they start to shut down in that way. There's a lot of possibilities here, but energy is being spent on survival. And so therefore, a whole lot of more energy is expended on self-regulation, right? Oh my gosh, I've got to try to hold myself together. Either I'm holding myself together in the face of an abuser, or perhaps I'm holding myself together because if I behave myself, then my parent will not drink too much tonight and I can control the situation. That's what I mean by regulation. So that piece is in there. And then that goes up to a whole lot less bandwidth for things like social emotional control, and even less for when we head into the classroom for cognition. And that's why these kids struggle so mightily academically. And anybody knows that once you start struggling academically, it's always the catch-up game for these kids. It's always, okay, we've got to get extra reading help, we've got to get extra math help, and they're being pulled away from some of those wonderful pro-social activities that happen in schools. The kids need just as badly the social emotional stuff as they need to learn their ABCs and read. So I'm going to shift just a little bit here, and we're going to talk about mental health, because I think that this is the crucial piece. Tom Insel is California's mental health czar. I keep hoping New York State's going to get one. We don't have one yet. But he says there are two kinds of families in America: those that are struggling with a mental illness and those who are not struggling with a mental illness yet. And I think that this is crucial. When we are looking at somewhere between a 60 and a 65% rate of at least one ACE in the population, 2 + 2 is 4, grass is green, the sky is blue, we're going to develop mental health issues. And yes, there is resilience, but I think we focus way too much on resilience and more we've got to help people function. While ACEs directly affect the physical health of people who have suffered ACEs, greater incidence of obese diabetes, chronic inflammatory disease, heart disease, all of which falls under the physical piece. If we address the mental health issues, what we see is physical health improves. And suddenly, and the way I like to think about it is, if you're less depressed and less anxious, you can get up and go for a run. You can get up and make yourself a salad, because eating a salad is hard compared to going and getting, a bowl of cereal, the sugary cereal, which gives you a happy little hit for 5 minutes and then you feel like crap, right? So all of these pieces are really important in terms of how we are addressing mental health. Is really important to address. What we have to do first? I don't know. Somebody smarter than me is going to have to figure that one out. That's just my opinion. So statistically, again, I think numbers are important. So what are we talking about? Nationally, that means 50 states, our children over their lifetime. So the current cohort, Gen Z, is going to have 1 in 5 affected by a diagnosable mental health condition in their childhood and early adulthood. So Gen Z is college students, right? So college students are down. And 1 in 20 of those will be disabled by their mental health condition. I always think about this as a class, right? Frequently, average class size is about 20 kids. So 4 of the kids in the class are going to have a diagnosable mental health condition, and 1 of them will be disabled by it. In 2017, there were 5,000 more recorded suicides than in 2014, according to the CDC. And suicides account for more fatalities than from breast cancer or traffic fatalities, and they are twice as common as homicide. People in need are more likely to end up in the prison system than in a hospital. This absolutely bears out. We don't have anywhere near enough beds. And this is the one that just breaks my heart. Suicides for children aged 10 to 14 tripled between 2007 and 2017. These numbers have skyrocketed. I do not have current statistics and what we're looking at in 2020, but I almost guarantee our suicide rates are way up. The early numbers that I'm seeing is they've gone up quite a bit. So New York State has a suicide prevention task force report. This was released a little over a year ago. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I do think it's important to see what we're doing in New York State. In the first 15 years of this century, suicide rates in the US population increased by 27.5%. Over that period, these increases were seen across all age groups and genders, with the exception of men ages 75 and older. New York State is not an exception, and the suicide rates are increasing 29.1% from 1999 to 2016. So I don't have more current statistics from New York State, but they are still going up. Locally, and I know Patty Schaap is on this call, so Patty, you're going to correct me when I'm wrong here, but Speak Up Portland is one of the answers to this task force report. It is the Cortland County Suicide Prevention Coalition. Speak Up stands for Suicide Prevention, Education, Awareness, Knowledge, Understanding, and Perseverance. I like that a lot. And it was developed to start to look at this task force recommendations and local data to respond locally to the need. How do we respond in Cortland? Because it's going to look differently to respond in Cortland than it is in Syracuse or New York City.
Karen, one point about that. This is Kate Downs.
Hi, Kate.
I was also on a work group for rural suicide prevention specifically because of this report that came out, and we myself, Gara Lloyd Lester, and I want to say Susan and Jackie from Seven Valleys were on it. And there was a handful of us folks focusing on rural suicide prevention, and we sent our recommendations to the state earlier this year. So there is, hopefully, fingers crossed, some more guidance coming out for rural communities.
That's fantastic. I think we really need it, and I'm really grateful for your work. Thanks, Kate. So this task force, and obviously we've got new things coming, but I will share what this task force, the New York State Task Force, recommended, and that was to strengthen public health efforts, integrate suicide prevention and healthcare, timely sharing of data for surveillance and planning, and infuse cultural competence throughout suicide prevention activities, specifically targeting Latina adolescents, veterans, and the LGBT community. And that is crucial because those are three very diverse groups of people requiring, I think, tailored approaches in terms of suicide prevention. Patty, did you have something you wanted to say? Nothing like putting you on the spot, I'm sorry. I saw you turn your camera on. I was like, oh, she's got something. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the neuropsychology of trauma. So exposure to traumatic events in childhood frequently causes developmental changes in the brain. Again, we've seen that brain scan. It changes the way we learn. It changes the way that we process stimuli, and it changes our DNA. And this is really crucial because when we change our DNA, what happens is the trajectory of how we're developing. We might be developing like this, and I hope you can see my hand. I know I'm tiny here, but when our DNA changes, it changes the direction we're going. We've changed our direction at that point. And gene expression is one of the crucial pieces, and that is mostly where the research at this point is in terms of how DNA is being affected by trauma, is gene expression. Which genes are turned on? You may have a gene in your family for alcoholism, or you may have a gene in your family for diabetes. Absent the changes there in expression that might come from trauma or the effects of trauma, that may change whether or not that gene is turned on or not. Yes, Natalie.
Hi, sorry. So
Hi.
Does that basically mean, like, if now my DNA is changed from my trauma, that I'm going to pass, like, not pass my trauma on, but in a sense, like, that's in my children's bodies now? Because it's my DNA?
Maybe. How's that for a horrible answer? I know that's the most obnoxious answer ever.
No, that's fine. I'm just curious.
So if you're interested, there's a really interesting field of study called epigenetics, EPI genetics.
Okay.
And it came out of some of the research done with people who were in the concentration camps in World War II. Okay. And when they came here, they did, they allowed, and actually for 1 year in my graduate school experience, I was allowed to watch this study going on. I did not participate. Very fancy people were doing it, not me. I'm just a social worker, but I did get to see it. And I was working in Beth Abraham, which is a skilled nursing facility in the Bronx, and they were doing research. They had a only Holocaust survivor floor of dementia patients, and they took histories of the families. So to answer your question, just because that's the background, when you do a little research, you'll come on to that. We don't know yet. There is some really interesting data that says yes. That data also says this, and this is the money, that you can change your DNA back. And that's what therapy is all about.
Through, like you can rewire your brain.
Yes.
Okay.
So yes, it may be changing our brain. Yes, maybe we can pass it on to our kids. Maybe we're passing on a gene that might be turned on or off. Again, science isn't there yet, at least not in my research. Try to keep on top of it, but there's a lot to keep on top of.
Can I say something quick?
Yes, please.
So I'm only 19 years old. Obviously, you guys know way more than I do, but
don't sell yourself short.
I know, but I do watch YouTube videos and stuff, and psychology and epigenetics, really. I don't know if you ever heard of Dr. Joe Dispenza, but he talks on things like this, the mind-body coherence, and he says things like that it is true. So I can relate to this a little bit, that you can change your DNA, but I don't know the true science behind it. I think there are the ideas out there, though.
I do too. I also think that, regardless, DNA, I think that we tend to put DNA up on the, the God pedestal a little bit. And I think that's dangerous because, these are like maps. But the truth is that we don't have to follow them. You know what I mean? So like you may have a map in your body for certain things, and you may be set up for certain things, especially given context of you may have been exposed to trauma, but you know, not to be overly, you have a choice, because the truth is like some of us really have a choice and some of us have a choice kind of. But I do think that there are ways of learning to move forward that can help us to, maybe we can't turn off that, you know, we may be predisposed to diabetes. My family is predisposed to diabetes. It's something I worry a lot about, but you know, knowing that knowledge is power, and there are things that we can do to kind of head that off. So I think, you know, I don't want to get too wrapped up in the DNA piece. I think it's crucial. Natalie, thank you so much for your question. I would say this, you know, Nathaniel and Natalie, watch the science, because I think somewhere over the next few years, you know, no one was really excited about epigenetics. It was very niche. And in the last 5 years or so, everyone's gotten really excited. You know why they got all excited about epigenetics? ACES. So, you know, I mean, this is all kind of connected. Do we have all the answers yet? No. That's one of the cool things about this. Like, we're going to see how this is going to play out.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for your question. I like questions, and they give me a chance to think for a minute. So you know, all of these things, so as this affects our DNA, it affects the way that we move through the world. And so trauma primes the pump for a number of long-term physical, emotional, and learning issues. But, and here is the big, really important piece, neuroplasticity gives us reason to believe that the effects of early trauma can be minimized with support from a positive and caring adult. That's it. That's the big deal. So even if you're walking around with the nuclear bomb of, you know, terrible, you know, mental health issues ahead in the family, or physiological issues that seem to run through the family, there are ways that we can head these things off. And they're not necessarily taking pills, although some people need the pills. There's nothing wrong with that either. In the last 10 years, research has revealed that neuroplasticity, also known as resilience, is a lifelong process. The brain can grow and change throughout adulthood, and new neurons every single day are being produced in your hippocampus. And what we do with those new neurons has a lot to do with what we are paying attention to. So I'm going to talk to you really quick about the brain. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but this is, I'm going to see if this will let me change my screen here. No, it will not. Okay. So I'm sorry, this is really tiny, but this is a model of the brain. I carry it with me everywhere I go. And this is your brain. This is my arm here is your spinal cord. And the brain basically has three parts. It has this, my palm of my hand is your autonomic nervous system. Again, that part of your brain, temperature, blood pressure, heart rate, breathing when we're not thinking about it. You know, you can stand up and walk over to a sink and get a glass of water, and you don't have to decide which muscles you're going to move to go do it. Your body just goes, oh, here we go, and you go and do it. That is that bottom part of your brain. This is the very back, down here on the bottom. We can't change that part of our brain unless there are some monks in Tibet that can meditate and change their body temperature. I think that's so cool. I am not among them. I struggle a lot with the whole meditation thing, but I'm working on it. So generally speaking, most of us mere mortals can't affect that part of our brain. This, my thumb here, is your limbic system. This is your midbrain. Sometimes people, when they're talking about it, call it your mammalian brain. It is where, for the most part, our hormones are, our thalamus, which decides not only our sex hormones, but also our stress hormones. Adrenaline and cortisol are in the thalamus. In the very dead center of your brain, right, or where my thumb knuckle is, there is your amygdala. That's the part of your brain, size and shape of an almond, that goes through all of your five senses plus your thoughts and decides whether or not you are under threat, either by something outside coming in or inside by our thoughts or internal sensation. My heart's beating really fast. Oh my gosh, something's wrong, right? That your amygdala picks up on that. And then your hippocampus is over here, so the other side of the brain. Hippocampus is the coolest part. It's my favorite part of the brain. Hippocampus is giving birth to new neurons every day. And what we do with those neurons is largely affected by how we think, where our attention goes. Dan Siegel, who is, he's a psychiatrist. He's written a whole bunch of books. He wrote My Whole Brain Child, and he also wrote Brainstorm, which is a wonderful book on adolescence. But he talks about where our attention goes, neural firing flows. And what that means is your neurons go to places where your attention is. Hippocampus is also the braking system for your stress system. So amygdala, red lights, oh my gosh, there's something wrong. Bear is chasing us. We have to go. Actually, the bear is a text message. It's nasty. Same reaction, right? And it's very binary. Amygdala it's black or white. Either we're in danger or we're not. So realize that we're being triggered all the time by things that nobody else can see. We're watching the news, right? We're watching, we get a text message from a supervisor or a professor who says, hey, you forgot this thing. Oh my gosh, right? Same reaction as someone's chasing you with a knife. Same thing. The difference is hippocampus jumps in there and says, oh, well, wait. And hippocampus is where memories start to form. Actually, just a text message, an upsetting text message, but no one's chasing you with a knife, right? So hippocampus jumps in and kind of like grades those trigger pieces. And then on the very top is your cortex. Now the scans that I showed you a bunch of slides back, those are cortical scans. It's just the top part of your brain. And again, your brain forms from back to front. So this back part of your cortex has to do with language. Babies are born and they're 3 months old. They have little social smiles and we're like, so cute, right? And they're interacting with us. And then they realize, oh, hands and feet are all working together. Oh, we're gonna crawl, then we're gonna walk, then we're gonna start acquiring language. That's all this part of the brain. 70% of your brain is added after you're born. There's tons of material there, but what we do with it is based on those interactions with other human beings, most social creatures on the planet. So all this stuff is happening for us. The problem is when we're stressed, right? When we're upset, when we are in a situation that we deem maybe dangerous, the brain stops working. Dan Siegel calls this flipping your lid. This is what I teach little kids, flipping your lid, right? Thinking turns off, and we're down here with feelings, and we're down here with what's happening in our body. This is why ACEs are a problem, because back to the beginning, when you are exposed to traumatic experiences as a child or as an adult, by the way, it's true for us adults too, it looks a little different. But when we're exposed to trauma, that is stored in our body. And that body reaction is what is the trauma, right? Because you're like walking down the street, like nothing's happening to you, but all of a sudden in your body, you start to feel what happened to you in that traumatic event. And so my work as therapist is to help people to understand what's happening here and where the triggers are so that they can process it. So they can go, oh, okay. And they think of their trauma as a memory rather than actually living it. Their body time travels back, so to speak, emotionally to when they had experienced the trauma. So anyways, neuroplasticity is wonderful because, as Natalie asked about DNA, what happens is we can change the way our body reacts to things. We can change the way things happen through neuroplasticity. And we can change our brains to say, okay, we need to deal with what happened. We can deal with that trauma. And then we can move on to other things. We see examples of this in a lot of people. It's called post-traumatic growth. There's a lot written about it. But I think the crucial piece is that when people deal with their story, that's what makes the change. That's what maybe turns off some of those DNA pieces and also sets us up, even if those DNA pieces, it turns out they're left on, Natalie, what happens is they probably are diminished by us having dealt with whatever's going on. So that if your family tendency is a 10, you might be a 5 or a 6. I wonder, I don't know. So while tragic childhoods make for a compelling story, the lasting effects of adversity affect the entire spectrum of the human experience. Not only are, oh, that's a repeat slide, I'm sorry about that. Trauma is a failure of connections inside the brain, between the brain and the body, between an individual experiencing trauma and the people and the world around them. This is often absolute connection, particularly when we're dealing with PTSD. It is so overwhelming that the individual retreats into themselves, perceiving that something is profoundly wrong with him or herself or themselves. Okay, there's something wrong with me. Kids don't go, oh my gosh, my mom's beating on me, it's all her fault. For the most part, they say, it was me. I did something wrong. And I have seen this, you know, when I worked in foster care, like kids will blame themselves for everything. They might fight with that parent, but when it comes down to it, they're taking responsibility. I'm the one that did it. So many well-meaning people, we're gonna talk just really quickly here about some interventions. Many well-meaning people want to say that they are trauma-informed or they start well-intended ACEs initiatives, but it's crucial that they are well-trained and ready to face the challenges. When you're interacting with traumatized people, they are not gonna be like, yay, you're here to help me. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Nope. If I had a nickel for every time I got an FU in my office, I would not be worried about putting my children through college. So, you know, we've got to have strong hearts going into this, but also realize that not everybody's going to receive this as a gift. And a lot of times there's a lot of pushback around ACEs initiatives. I've seen macro interventions and micro interventions. And I do think that we have to go big and go home, so to speak. ACEs have been attacked from both ends of the spectrum, both advocates and also people who want to deny that they exist. And while individual interventions are crucial, most people don't even know about ACEs or assume that trauma is for soldiers with PTSD and that it is a specific group, not everybody. Schools, employers, and individuals need to be educated about ACEs and how these affect people in their community, how they affect the people that they work with, or how they affect their employees. We have to be mindful that people will downplay their own history, that we've been a nation at war since 2001, and most people know a veteran who has been deployed and might associate trauma only with PTS and combat-related stress, and will say anything less is not a big deal. And my answer to that, to anybody who says it to me, and I hear it all the time, is you can drown in a puddle, you can drown in an ocean. The end result is still the same. Like we gotta get in there and try to see what we can do to help. People often perceive their own reactions to trauma or trigger events as drama or overreactions. And people will say this all the time, or, oh, this is just drama, blah, blah, blah. And it's tough because it downplays people's own hearts and how they really perceive things. And we can take risks that probably are not so good for us when we're not paying attention to that. Many ACEs initiatives have been sunk because shame is always at work. And particularly when we start talking about stuff that trauma that takes place in a family, is really hard for people to admit their stories. And this is where I have a radical idea, and I'm sure there are many, many flaws to it, but I like the idea of considering ACEs interventions with universal design. What does that mean? Well, we teach everybody about ACEs. I know, pie in the sky, but I like to go big. And then we just proceed as if everybody has ACEs. Individual people who have PTSD or are dealing with trauma, we would empower them to go get therapy. We would empower them to be connected with services, hopefully, where there is relations, you know, where everyone sort of works together. But not unlike a clean water initiative, there isn't really a downside other than money and effort. And I know money is always the sinker of these things. But ACEs could be built into existing grant monies and included in other education initiatives. And if we could get private employers involved, civic organizations, etc., we could consider creating a subcommittee or work group organized around outreach or communications or data, all worthy efforts moving forward. And that most successful ACE initiatives ensure every sector and demographic in the community is eventually represented in main membership. A system to cycle people through from different sectors, and especially people from typically underrepresented groups, is crucial. If we don't get people who we have buy-in on all areas of the community, and I know that's tricky, especially when we're talking about rural interventions, because people may feel really singled out, we think that is a form of trauma, leaving people away from the table. And I think that it's really important to address that. The CDC actually has a wonderful website, believe it or not. It's one of the parts that have not disappeared. And they talk about what employers can do, including adopting and supporting family-friendly policies, paid leave and flexible work schedules. You would be amazed at how that changes family relations in the home. Getting healthcare providers. I am amazed how often when I talk to primary care physicians that they don't know about ACEs. We will talk about anxiety, we will talk depression. You know, doctors are trained to just deal with the person sitting in front of them, which there are wonderful reasons why that can be great, except for when it isn't great. And so helping doctors think about how they can recognize current risk for ACEs and if there is history in parents of pediatric patients. That one's tricky, and I haven't thought my way around that one, but there's a lot of brains here. Maybe people have some good ideas. And I think the important piece here is to recognize challenges that families face and offer support and encouragement to reduce stress. And support community programs and policies that provide safe, healthy conditions for all children and families. And it may be helpful for us to consider specific target groups or populations to get buy-in. So I want to hold up just one community or one thing that I participate in every year that I think is an example of a micro intervention that I think has really nice ripples out into the community. I know, police organizations have been in the news for the last 6 months. I don't have an answer for our racism issue in this country. However, Portland has this wonderful program that they've had for years, much longer. I've participated in the last, I think, 4 times that we've done it. And I teach a 2-hour course on trauma, somewhat similar to this one, although not specifically. It's a week-long law enforcement training offered to local officers, and they teach crisis intervention and training both for the populations that they serve and also it's a PTSD stress inoculation for the officers themselves. And I think it walks a really interesting line in terms of empowering them to understand that the people that they are out serving and protecting are human beings who are perhaps coming into whatever intervention that they're responding to with a whole lot of stuff that has nothing to do with what's happening in that moment. And it also helps them to understand that some of the work that they're doing is maybe traumatic for other people and also traumatic for themselves. And it's very rare that trauma doesn't go both ways. To everybody who's involved, everybody's pretty much touched by that. So this is just one tiny little thing. It's an interesting training. They bring community resources, social services, juvenile services. A judge comes in and talks with them, DSS, child welfare workers, and they share all the services that they have to offer so that officers have this information so that it's not, just, okay, let's put them in cuffs and take them down to the station, but we may need to hook them up with other services in the community. And also, it crucially goes to a group that I always laugh. It's one of my favorite trainings to do because it's a room of 20 officers who sit there, completely stone-faced for 2 hours. And then what's really funny is I finished, no one's got any questions. It's like a dead room. It's almost as bad as this is, but you guys are great. Thank you. But I go out in the lobby afterwards and they all come to talk to me then. They don't want to talk to me in front of their peers, but they will talk about what's going on in trauma out in the lobby. So I think that having these kinds of interventions are crucial in terms of helping us knit our community together, help to address some of these pieces. Is it a fixer for everything? Of course not. But it's a drop in I think it's more than a drop in the bucket. I think it's a few drops in the bucket. I see Patty nodding, she knows. Okay. So I just want to talk really briefly about trauma-informed schools. I have been really lucky. I have trained many, but not all of the schools locally. They bring me in to talk to teachers and teachers' assistants. And those are my favorite days. I love to go in and talk to people about this. But I think that it is crucial to have all staff be trained. I love to talk to teachers. They're my heroes. My mom was a teacher. I'm a big fan. But my favorite days are when I get to talk to bus drivers and teaching assistants, because these people know these kids. They're the ones who are interacting with them one-on-one throughout the day. And for those of us who are trying to intervene with these kids, many times they are a wealth of information that we would never get in a classroom or taking a biopsychosocial, assessment with a family. Bus drivers see kids, they see their house every day. They see who's bringing them out to the bus or that nobody's bringing them out to the bus. They see what kind of emotional shape they are getting on the bus in the morning, or yeah, we had to sit out there and lay on the horn for a few minutes because we knew no one was there to wake him up. So we knew we'd get him out. I mean, bus drivers are amazing. And I've had 2 districts, one of which is Cortland, and I love doing that training because they get so into this. They're like, wait, tell me about this. And they want to talk about the whole thing. I'm going to teach my bus about this. So, I mean, these groups that we, oftentimes aren't paying enough attention to are gold mines in terms of outreach. It doesn't have to always be the people that, teachers have plenty to do, not putting anybody down, but we've got a whole bunch of other people that can reach out and really make a difference with kids. They can talk with them, those long rural bus routes. I know kids who are on the bus for an hour. It's a great time to chat and get to know your driver. I want to talk just really briefly about equity, inclusivity, and diversity. I think if there's one thing that has really come to the foreground in the last 6 months, although the pandemic has taken away from it a little bit, but failure to address equity, inclusivity, and diversity at any time when we're looking at community-wide interventions is a fail, immediately, almost, most of the time. But also, as we're talking about trauma, it's a trauma in and of itself. If we're not actively inviting people to come to the table, they're not going to come, especially if they don't feel welcomed. And particularly when we're talking about people who've been exposed to trauma, they're like, I'm not going to go sit in there. So we have to reach out. Black, Indigenous, persons of color are disproportionately affected by trauma and therefore must be represented at the table as we work towards answers. Representation, even, and I would say especially, when the community you are in is rural and arguably less diverse, it's crucial to seek voices of color as their perspectives are crucial to build a culturally comprehensive response. People who are BIPOC, LGBTQ, and the disabled are those who start out being ignored. They start out being not invited to things, and they're not empowered to share their experiences. And those are things that we must reach out and invite, welcome, be ready to hear any and all ideas. They need to have a seat at the table, and organizers must insist on anti-racist policies. ACES are a hotbed of microaggressions, and putting a bunch of traumatized people in a room. I used to work Lindy mentioned Linden Hill, and I worked in a residential treatment facility, and everybody was traumatized. I think half the staff was traumatized, if I'm truthfully honest with you. But you put all those people in a room, and they may not be overtly aggressive towards each other, but you better believe that you better have your tippy toes on to pay attention to those microaggressions. And they're really toxic and hurtful, especially the younger someone is. They haven't had the time to develop some of that thick skin that some people, as we get older, unfortunately, we get a couple coats of shellac on and it doesn't bother us quite as much. We can't assume that people are like ducks and it's just going to roll off their back. It just doesn't work that way. So we also can't assume, and this is something that my people, my social worker people, we cannot assume that woke white people are going to represent diverse voices. Certainly, I'm a middle-aged white woman named Karen. I am not the person that probably should be preaching all this to you, but it is crucial that we invite other voices and that we hear their experience from their perspective, not us telling people what their perspective is or what their experience is. ACES Connection, which is a great website if you're interested, ACES Connection, I think it's .com, but it might be .edu, I'm sorry. They have a diversity, equity, and inclusion tool that's on the website. You don't have to reinvent the wheel here, but it has a wonderful little, basically step-by-step tutorial of how do I kind of make sure that we're ticking all the boxes. And I think using these kinds of tools are really helpful because we can't assume that we know everything. Even if we were trying really hard to be responsive, you're always going to forget something. It's like going to the grocery store. So this tool lays out a series for groups to start with, but also community inclusion and representation should be the gold standard of creating community-wide responses.
Karen, it is acesconnections.com, and it
Thanks,
is
Lindy.
an excellent resource. So just wanted to share that.
I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
So, oops, I didn't change one slide and not the other. After we bake in diversity and inclusivity, and we got to start there, ultimately the goal is to achieve integration of trauma-informed and resilience-based best policies and practices in all areas of the community. And I know that sounds like crazy pie in the sky, but at the same time, I think if we were able to even achieve 35% inclusion of groups in terms of dealing with this, having people know what we're talking about here, what we might find is that things will change. There's a cascade effect once people start understanding what's happening. There's no one way to move forward, and sometimes the best laid plans go awry. I think, on some level we have to have thick skins when we think about addressing ACEs. There's been, I think, I look at Nadine Burke-Harris. She is California's Surgeon General. She is the TED Talk person for ACEs. She wrote a wonderful book called The Deepest Well. In all of your free time, you should read it at some point. But even she has reached a lot of roadblocks and actually has been really open and honest about reaching the roadblocks as she's trying to implement ACEs initiatives. She focused particularly on dealing with pediatricians, but it's worth taking a look. Not to reinvent the wheel when you start to look at these things. Let's see where other people fell down and see where, oh, hey, we could address this here. So anyway. So let's talk a little bit about how this actually plays out in the brain, because I think that this is important. So we talk big, now we're going to go small. We're going to go more on an individual level. So we talked about how everybody's brain works. So this is an example of an intervention. This is how we might work with someone who has experienced trauma. So I use a number of different techniques. I'm kind of a shotgun therapist in terms of we pull a little of this and a little of that, and we kind of throw a bunch of stuff at it and we kind of see what sticks. And different clients find different interventions work best for them. But this is where I often start. It's a really simple intervention. It's called polyvagal theory, developed by Stephen Porges, who is a medical doctor. It's a framework for understanding how the brain works under threat and what we can do about it. So how do we help people translate trauma in the body and learn ways of coping to minimize the effects on social, emotional, and physical health? If you feel safe and loved, your brain becomes specialized in exploration and play and cooperation. If you feel frightened and unwanted, it specializes in managing feelings of fear and abandonment. That is a quote by Bessel van der Kolk, who is arguably the godfather of modern trauma treatment. He's a little bit of a problematic figure, but we won't get too much in there. His science is sound. But trauma is stored in the body, right? We store all the stuff that happens down here in our body. I know you can't see me, I'm sorry. Not our mind. And oftentimes we think it is. That in fact, even the story that we tell ourselves is that trauma is up here, right? We say, oh, I'm crazy, right? It's all up here. Like, well, actually it's not. It's down here. It's below the neck. So when we say someone is having a flashback or someone is having a traumatic reenactment, you see it in the movies, and it's like there's a movie within a movie showing the person's trauma, right? And so this person fade, and then the person goes and is like reliving, like being in Fallujah and like going and like seeing their friends get hurt or whatever. That's not what happens in real life. And this is one of those instances where the movies hurt our psychology in terms of how we deal with this. So when we're triggered, when we have an activation of, something reminds us of our trauma, our body, not our brain, time travels back to the time when we were in the trauma. We're back to the living room with an alcoholic parent who is going to abuse us, or we're back to a situation where we're in danger. But it's happening down here in our body. And anybody who, my example for this is anybody's been out, I'm assuming most of you have been out driving at some point, and somebody cuts you off. And what's the thing that you do? You go, right? And you have this activation in your body. Like oh my gosh, you hit the brakes, right? You hit the horn maybe, there might be a few choice words that come out, but you're all worked up. And then, You calm down, you're okay, the accident didn't happen, you settle down relatively quickly, and you're on about your business. The problem with someone who is stuck in a trauma response, that moment that you get when you might get into an accident stays for about 36 hours in the body and can be re-triggered during that time through our thoughts, through smells, through things that we taste or touch, or somebody says something and it sounds a certain way and boom, we're off and running. That's called an activation. That is when we start to go, I just messed that up. So what happens, what is activated is our vagus nerve. And the graphic on the right is a line drawing of the vagus nerve. Your vagus nerve is your 10th cranial nerve. 1 through 9, 11 and 12 are one-way streets from what's happening up here in your brain down to your fingers and toes, right? They're wired a little differently depending on which nerve it is. Your vagus nerve, and unfortunately the graphic isn't quite as clear as I would like for it to be, but if you look on the right, just below the brain, you'll see the vagus nerve is behind all of your facial muscles. And that's one of the reasons why we're having so much trouble wearing masks. There is a sensory piece to wearing a mask, but also I'm sitting here watching you guys, and I thank you so much for those of you who didn't turn your cameras off, but I'm seeing your faces and you smile or you nod or you do this, and I can say, oh, we're good. Or someone's like, what is that thing? I'm like, oh, okay, I got to backtrack, right? So we take all this information in our faces and say, oh, this is what's happening. And when someone has wide eyes and are smiling, we're like, oh, okay, they're good. That's a person that's friendly. We're good. Whereas someone who, again, we talk about microaggressions, right? Someone's like, right, little side eye. Oh, whoop, okay, back off. Someone's annoyed. We back up. So understanding that one of the reasons why we have so much trouble wearing masks is suddenly this is the data that we're getting and it's hard for us. We're uncomfortable with that, deeply uncomfortable with that. Sorry, sidetrack, but important. So that's, that vagus muscle runs, or vagus nerve runs through your face, and then it goes down into your body and attaches every single one of your internal organs: heart, lungs, your pancreas, your liver, your belly, and then it goes down in, and you can see on the bottom there, those are your guts. And we say, oh, I've got a gut feeling. You know what that is? That's your vagus nerve going, oh yeah, I got it. And yeah, no, this is not so good. So we got, I have a bad feeling about that from Star Wars, right? That's they're feeling it in their gut. That is we also refer to that sometimes as the little brain, because there is so much neurological activity going down there. It is not, you don't think in your gut, but you get sensory information because 80% of your vagus nerve information goes upwards to your brain. 20% comes back down, but that's completely different. Your other nerves are only one way. So you get a lot of information that you are taking in through your body, through your internal organs. That's why when your heart speeds up, you go, oh, what's going on, right? Unless you're like running, you're like, why is this happening? That is all this information that we are reading from our vagus nerve. So what does this mean? So polyvagal theory talks about a ladder. And I'm sorry, it's a terrible graphic of a ladder, but it was the only one I could find that was public domain. So at the top of the ladder is safe and social, right? We're all good. We're sitting here, you're smiling, I'm smiling, we're talking about cool stuff. I think it's cool. And, we're good. You might be out with friends having pizza, you may be, Zooming and playing a board game with somebody, like you're all good, safe and social. And then all of a sudden, your amygdala gets sensory information that says, oh, all is not well, something is wrong, and black and white, ready, here we go. Tell your, thalamus, fire up the kidneys, we need adrenaline and cortisol, something is wrong, 1/20th of a second, we take that information in, and everything starts going, and we start to go down the ladder, okay? And that is decided by our 5 senses, plus our thoughts, bodily senses, bodily states, our stomach's bothering us, or, we might find that, our heart's beating too fast. We all worry these days about, oh my gosh, what if I can't breathe? What if it's COVID, right? All these things, sensory information that gets us going, sends us down the ladder. Fight and flight are activation phases. And it's a ladder because once you go down the ladder, you have to go through the other phases to get back up to the top which is safe and social. So if you're down in fight, you've got to go through flight, then you can be safe and social. If you're down in freeze, you've got to go through fight, then flight, then you're back up. So you're up and down, it's a ladder. You can't skip rungs. So fight and flight are activation phases. They push on us to act on our stressors. We may want to run, which might look like running, but it also could look like sabotage, forgetting, quitting. You know, I gotta go to the bathroom, I'm leaving. You know, little kids are notorious for, I don't feel good, right? Those tummy aches. If there's not some sort of, you know, flu virus, tummy flu going around, it's anxiety, right? Something's wrong. I gotta go to the nurse's office. All of that is flight. Fight might look like aggression. It might actually look like someone wanting to hurt somebody, but it could also look like an insult or blaming somebody else. Fight often shows up when we feel shamed. And that is where kids often act out when they feel shamed. They will take it out on somebody else. They will go after their neighbor. They may not necessarily go after the person who is the trigger, but it's coming out one way or the other. Freeze is an important one, and that is one that we know when frequently people don't go down into freeze unless something very bad has happened or they have a trauma history. That is a much more rare symptom than fight or flight. Most of us cope with fight or flight, and we don't ever go down to freeze. Freeze, however, can look like compliance, right? Oh, absolutely, Mrs. Johnson, I'll do anything you want, even if what you're asking me to do is dangerous, right? Kids will have these compliant behaviors. It can look like shutdown, where they are done. They're not responding. They're not listening to anything. They are shut down, they're done. And I often think about this as the deer in headlights response, right? You are driving down the road at night, the deer comes out in front of your car and it freezes, right? And you're like, run, and they can't. The same thing is true for humans when we're in a freeze response. We can't fight, we can't run, we're stuck. And that immobilization is really difficult. Humans do not do well when we are trapped. It is a bad response to be stuck in. And uncertainty makes everything worse. So I just want to talk about something that I think is going to be added to our ACEs, and that is COVID. Here is an invisible illness that we get by being social with other human beings. And the problem with it is that we all got told back in the middle of last March, go home, close your doors, don't leave your house. We don't know where this virus is. So what happens is our brain immediately, right? We got our kids, we got some groceries, we bought too much toilet paper, so there wasn't enough for everybody else. But what also happens is we all went into our houses, and if you're anything like I was, you were like freaked. I mean, that is weird that everybody got told to go home and don't go anywhere. That's not normal. That's not what we do as humans. I got things to do. I've got to go to work. My kids are supposed to go to school. My husband's supposed to go to work. None of that is happening. So the logical part of my brain said, there's a sickness. We're going to be here for a couple of days. We're going to be fine. And the problem with that is, and the problem that has grown over the last 7 months is our brain goes, okay, Karen, I'm looking around here and I don't see anything. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing Zoom calls in your closet all day long, every day, right? Because that's what I do. I'm standing in my closet right now. Anyway, so the thing is that we don't know what's happening. And so our brain goes fight, flight, fight, freeze, flight, fight, freeze, flight, fight, freeze, all day, all day. This was all of us all last spring. What happened? We all thought we were going to learn Italian. We were baking bread. We were like going to, start major craft projects. We were going to do like home improvement. Most of us didn't do that, right? Why? Because our brains were completely freaked out. That has nothing to do with any personal feeling on anybody's part. That is, our brain is going, what the hell is going on? And when we go fight, flight, freeze, all like this, all day, every day, at some point we hit a wall and we become numb and we crash. And then we're sitting on the couch watching Schitt's Creek, eating whatever's in the pantry for days, right? So the problem is that we're stuck. And then we go back into fight, flight, or freeze. So we've been through cycles and cycles of this at this point. And humans do not do well with this. We need our people. We're tribal. We want to be with our clan. We want to be out and about with other people. We want those micro interventions that we so enjoy. One of the things I miss the most, I mean, I see my clients every day, but I miss the elevator ride from the basement in my building up to my 4th floor office. And I know that that's silly as it gets, but every day I would run into somebody and I would have a lovely little 30-second conversation about something completely stupid. I see my children and my husband a whole lot more, and I love them very much, but I'm not going to have stupid conversations with them about dumb things like the weather and the leaves are getting tracked into the building or whatever. So these conversations are so crucial in terms of what we're doing. So that's an example of, that is a fight or flight response, polyvagal response to trauma that we're all dealing with. So I just want to talk a little bit about neuroception. Neuroception is the reason why we are waiting for something to happen, right? Neuroception defines brain state. So our story follows the state of what's going on. Stories are thoughts and emotions that form our nervous system state. If we're calm, we can relax. If our nervous system state is determined by our internal and external systems, understanding of sensations, our 5 senses, and our thoughts. This is what neuroception is. So our neuroception really is our gut reactions to things, and it takes other information, 5 senses, into account as well. People who have experienced trauma frequently have faulty neuroception. They often default to a state of danger, and it sends them down the ladder to fight, flight, and freeze. Many therapies encourage people to notice how they're feeling, internal and external systems. So what's going on in their body, what's going on outside, and name them, observing how our set and our setting influence our state of mind, our body, and our feelings. So our neuroception, people who are traumatized, people who have ACEs, sense danger more than people who don't. And the problem is because their brain is wired to deal with that danger, they immediately jump into, oh my gosh, the house is going to burn down. Even if they're not vocalizing that, they're feeling it in their body. And that's why ACEs are crucial, because they sense danger oftentimes where there isn't any, or there's just small danger, right? You're in an elevator and suddenly the elevator goes, right? There's like a little bump and like immediately everybody laughs and it's fine and everybody gets off at their floor. But people who are in a little thing where they get that sensory input, oh my gosh, and they might trigger them into a whole thing where they are in that state of mind for up to 36 hours. So this is really destructive in people's lives. Yes, Nathaniel.
Okay, so what would you, not like label it as, but what would you like define that emotion as? Would it be anxiety? Like what would you consider this whole body sensation, like negative emotions?
So it can look like a lot of things. I would say yes, anxiety, but like anxiety on steroids, right? So, you know, you might be somewhat anxious watching a horror movie, but for someone who is traumatized, you may be living the horror movie while you're walking through the grocery store, but you're in it. You know, Jason Voorhees is chasing you through the milk aisle. Does that make sense? Like it's all extra.
Yeah. It makes sense. Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
I think I probably would have to do more research to understand different mental illnesses and things, but yeah, that answers it basically.
I think the thing I'm hearing mental illness, and that's something that I want to just really quickly say is diagnosis is like something that we need to have for insurance companies. And but the reality is like, this can look like depression. This can look like anxiety. This could look like obsessive compulsive disorder. This could look like schizophrenia. And it's our job to assess for trauma before we slap a label on it that it is a mental illness.
Yeah, for sure.
And oftentimes the medications that we use to try to help people who are struggling with trauma, they don't work. And that's one of the reasons why it's crucial for us to therapeutically respond from a trauma perspective, because once honestly, the intervention is teach them what's happening so they can go, well, this sucks, but I'm not going to die. I'm okay. And I can continue on about my life. Not there's something wrong with me or I'm crazy, which I hate that. But the thing that's wrong is that they automatically are I'm in danger. but it can
I
look
get
like
that.
a lot of
Yeah,
different things.
for sure. And I could put my input on it too. I've definitely had anxiety and things too. My parents are divorced. I've experienced this a little bit, so I can look at it from that perspective. But thank you, definitely.
Absolutely. I'm happy to do it. I'm going to skip ahead because we are running out of time, and I'm so pleased with the discussion. I will make sure Lindy has the slide. Actually, Lindy has the slides. She can get them to you. But the piece I want to talk about really quickly here is the stress cycle, because this is the last piece that I think is crucial as we're talking about how do we respond to this, or how do we look at ACEs in the community. And that is, so we've talked about our polyvagal ladder. At the top there, safe and social, right? And then clockwise, there's a trigger, there's a danger, where neuroception kicks in, I'm in danger, there's something happening. And then we go into activation, right? Fight or flight, or we go into, which is mobilization or immobilization. I'm stuck, I'm frozen, I can't do anything. The thing that pulls us out of that deep, fight, flight, or freeze is one of two things: connection to other people, safe social connections with people, with positive, caring human beings. I'm really careful about positive because positive can be toxic, but people who care genuinely about us as another human being, or something that we call glimmers. And I promise you, I did not make this name up. I hate it almost as much as I hate trigger, but a glimmer is something that someone can do to take care of themselves, to pull themselves out of that fight, flight, or freeze state. And those things are singing, humming, dancing, chanting, rocking, swinging, tapping, that's EFT, emotional freedom technique, talking with a friend, conscious breathing, guided meditation, appreciating nature, taking a 20-minute walk in the woods is about as effective as a low dose of an antidepressant in terms of boosting mood. Bilateral stimulation, any left-right movement in the body, again, that vagus nerve is like a guitar string. And if you can kind of strum it a little bit, it helps send happy little signals up into your brain that you're safe, that everything's okay. Petting something, I don't know about you guys, but I love my pets these days, especially because we're not out socializing with my people. Soft hugs, cuddles, splashing a little cold water on your face will hit that vagus nerve to help us settle down. Pleasant smells, that's why so many people really enjoy essential oils. I don't know if they do anything else, but I know smelling something really lovely is like calming. It's sort of like, oh, okay, here I am. It smells nice here. I'm good. Tongue stretches, craniofacial massage, personal grooming. People are really into those videos where people see that, like, combing their hair and like putting their makeup on. It's very calming for people. Having ice cold or very warm beverages, tasting something sweet, acupuncture, spiritual work, or prayer, and stretching. All of these things are wonderful interventions for trauma. And one of my favorite things is, and my clients always roll their eyes because I said, okay, here's, before we start talking about medication, let's try yoga. And they're like, oh boy, I wandered into the wrong therapist's office. But I'm like, stay with me here. Yoga is about as good as any anti-anxiety medication. And it's a twofer in terms of anxiety, because no matter what pose you're doing, you have to think about where your body is, right? So downward dog, everybody's done downward dog at some point, right? You got to think about where your hands are. You're, lifting your butt up in the air. You've got to see how straight you can make your legs. You've got to feel where your feet are. And that sensing of where all those parts of your body is will calm you down. So it is a wonderful tool for the rest of us to be like, oh, okay, you don't have to be a therapist to say, okay, let's just go turn on some yoga by Adrienne on YouTube and do 20 minutes of yoga. Like, that's great. Super easy intervention. So I promised I would do 90 minutes. I did 94, John and Lindy. I hope that's okay. I've got some other little interventions. They're in the slides. You guys are smart. You're going to understand them. I'll have Lindy get them to you. But I know we're going to do some breakout rooms. And I have a slide for that. There we go. Lindy, do you want to jump in here, or you want me to?
Actually, you want to go ahead and walk them through it, and then what we can do is we're just going to kind of randomly break into 2 or 3 groups, and I don't know how long you want to give people, you know, what your thoughts are, and we'll pull people back together. So you tell me, and we'll do that.
Maybe we do 10 minutes, or does 10 sound good to do the breakout groups, and then we can come back and everybody can kind of share a little bit about what they did.
That
Awesome.
should work.
Okay,
Right.
so the 2 things that we really wanted to ask people about was, what was your most important takeaway? Like, what are you taking home that's your big idea, or the thing that you learned that you're like, oh, that's cool, I want to learn more about that. And then, did anything sort of bubble up as I was talking in terms of what you might want to do to take to the community to address ACEs, or maybe that you feel like, oh my gosh, I want to, you know, take this to my whatever club, I don't know. So think about those 2 things, maybe share in your breakout group, and then come back out, and I will stay and answer any questions. I just want to make sure we respect everybody's time, because I'm really grateful for you taking the time to be here.
All right, so we're going to tell people, we're going to give people maybe 8 to 10 minutes, right? And so we'll
Perfect.
just, when it's time, we're going to break into 2 groups. There'll be 6 or 7 in a group, and we'll see where we go. So, all right, here we are. Thanks, guys. So the questions are, what was your most important takeaway, and brainstorming steps that our community can do to address ACEs. So, all right, thank you.
Uh, Anybody can start with what is your takeaway? What are your takeaways? What do you think we can do? There's no particular order to these 2 questions.
All right, so are we all back? John, if you're there, John, I think was going to help kind of walk us through, or how we want to, I'm not sure, John or Karen, who wants to kind of hear what the groups had to say. I'm going to let you guys decide that.
Considering time, I'll just dive right in.
All right, thank you.
And I'll get the ball rolling, and then ask the other group. We focused in our group on takeaways, and so here are just some of the ideas that popped up that hit home. One was the positive thought that trauma is reversible. We can turn things around. The idea that the process of the struggle is important for everyone to learn how to manage trauma on our own. The stories of struggle, I'm going to quote Nathan with his phrase, getting into the meat and potatoes of these struggles. And getting into the idea that we want to get past the symptoms. We want to get to the causes of the trauma and address those, and to be strength-based and person-centered. And I'm probably leaving items out, so I'll ask any of my colleagues in the team to dive in before we listen to the other group.
Sounds like
Hearing agreement, we'll move on to the other group.
All right, who is going to be the spokesperson from the other group? I mean, Karen, let's unmute you.
To say Karen kind of led the discussion. If she doesn't want to go, I can take it.
All right.
I'm sorry, I was muted. We talked a lot about how some very specific examples were that people that came up for folks, and Joy shared a little bit about her classroom experience today. Some people talked about that things kind of went on for for a longer period. They were surprised to hear that reactions can last over or have a duration of 36 hours. And Seth, did I miss anything?
Just really quick, I think a few of us, aside from your hand, after you left, people thought said that your hand analogy was very impressive and accurate, and they loved it. And then a couple of us said that they thought it was very cool that your brain can disassociate from trauma, and then there's a way to reactivate it and bring you back and heal from that. So.
All right. Anything else? One of the things that I, and having listened to both groups, and I think that is such an important takeaway is that, and I know Julie in the first breakout room articulated it beautifully, that, Karen started, I think, the presentation talking about how heavy and, serious, and this is weighty stuff. But I think for me, at least, as we're looking at what can the community do, what can we do to move ourselves forward with this, it has got to be that looking at hope and building resilience, that, children, adults who have, whether it's a 1 or 2 ACE score or it's an 8 or 10 ACE score, that doesn't have to be a death sentence, that there are things that we can do that can help, rewire, reroute, redo that. So for me, that's always one of the most important things of any of these conversations is that there are things we can do to change it. And now I think our challenge becomes step 3 through 23 of this process. What is that going to look like? So Karen, John, I don't know if there's any closing comments that you have before we kind of pull it all together, or.
I'd like to dive in and just pick up, Lindy, on what you were saying about what to do next. I was struck in a number of ways by some of the clues that Karen mentioned to some of the work that some folks have been talking about, have already started working on. And in no particular order, Seth has been planning a way of addressing obesity in a unique way. Some of my interns and the whole college is working on diversity and inclusion. There are 2 folks who are with us today, and I'm not going to mention Jess by name, who is working with one of the organizations on campus for a Pause for Relief project having to do with pets. Karen mentioned pets, and taking a unique approach to this because we have to be distanced. So all of this goes back to the idea that we've already got a lot of material that we can be working with on projects that can approach different aspects of this challenge. And so I'm going to then hand this over to Lindy and Karen. Thank you for letting me.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Karen, any closing thoughts or?
I'm just tickled that people took the time to come and learn about this. I think you probably picked up that this is my passion, and that this is, I think, crucial information to put in everybody's hands. I also think that, I mentioned toxic positivity, but I think that Lindy is absolutely right that when we acknowledge how hard things are, then that's when we start to make things turn around. And I absolutely believe that we can make things better, even just by understanding what's happening in our brains and our bodies. On some level, it's really that simple and that difficult. That, once we start to do that, we can start to do this. And I cannot wait to hear about everybody's projects. They all sound so cool. So please keep me in the loop.
Absolutely. And just a couple of things, you know, we shared this after last week's meeting as well, that, you know, I feel like what we've tried to do between last week, and then Karen certainly took that to a much deeper level this week, was really just to give some introduction, to give you some things to start to think about and to process. And there's so many other places that we can and should be going with this. So, you know, if there are groups or people that you think could benefit and would be interested in the movie, we have the copy of the movie that we are certainly willing to share. We can even schedule other events, you know, in the community so that we can screen that. We also, you know, in terms of some other training, myself and Brandy Stroff, who is the Family Development Director at CAPCO, have had the opportunity to get some training and certification to do some of these intro level talks and presentations about ACEs and building resilience in our community. Last week, and I think it really was prevalent in a lot of what, okay, thank you, definitely give Nathaniel that opportunity in just a minute. But the other thing last week we talked about, and I feel like Karen really talked about it a lot too, was the significance of protective factors in people's lives. And there's some really good information in some other presentations and trainings around that, about identifying what those 5 protective factors are and how we build those in individuals, in families, and in our community. So if you have any questions or are interested in any of that, please just, you know, feel free to reach out to me. John has all of my contact information. And Nathaniel, you had a comment.
Yes, thank you. Karen, you talk about knowledge is power, and I'm starting to get onto that rail and that train a little bit now. But we have this idea that with the internet, you can't believe everything on the internet and everything on the social media, really. So do you guys have any advice for us younger students, how to differentiate opinions and facts, really, and create a basis and an understanding to start building off of to better ourselves?
I know Karen's going to have a lot more to say about that, but I'm just going to jump in and say 2 very quick things. I think it's the same thing as how I would answer that question about what can I believe on Facebook and what can I believe about the politics and the you know, election and all that. Just choose your sources wisely. And Karen had some really good slides in her presentation from the CDC. The CDC has some excellent resources and just vast amounts of information about ACEs and resilience. Harvard University has a whole websites dedicated to ACEs and resilience. Karen mentioned acesconnection.com. Again, tremendous resources just in terms of articles to read, infographics, whole training curriculums. So those are 3 that I would strongly recommend as very solid research, evidence-based resources around ACEs, trauma, and trauma-informed care and building resilience. Karen, I'm sure you have others that.
No, I think that's great. I mean, anybody, first of all, I want to say that if anybody wants more information, you can go to my website, which is www.cortland.care, C-A-R-E, or you can email me. I will get these slides to you. My email address is on that. But I think, I mean, honestly, with any sort of looking at what's going on the internet, follow it back to the source. Who's writing it? You know, I was shocked the other day. I was reading an article, a psychology article, and I went back and saw the person that wrote it was somebody who, you know, had like a energy practice, which I'm not putting that down, but that's not the same thing as having a Harvard reviewed peer journal. So, you know, I think we just need to chase stuff down a little bit. And I think on some level, I'm not going to say anything about anybody else, but I will say with me that I know that I've gotten to where I have to do research deeper before I start, you know, taking on information. Like, I think we suffer from too much information, and so it's on us to edit.
Right.
And that way, you know, you can dig a little deeper, and one, you might find something cool to find out more about, but also that, you know, oftentimes you find a trusted source and they'll mention to others. So, you know,
Right.
Dan Siegel, who did the hand model of the brain, he talks to a whole bunch of other guys. They introduced me to the Australians who are doing a whole bunch of other trauma work. Like, that's how, those are ways that finding trustworthy information.
And to Karen's point, my experience is if this is something you're interested in, once you hit CDC or once you hit ACES connection, you are going to be down so many rabbit holes, because to Karen's point, every article, every resource, every curriculum takes me into 30 other directions to go. There's a lot of really good stuff out there. So Nathaniel, thank you for asking that question. I think that's really, really a critical way to look at this. And Karen, again, I just want to kind of close this out by saying, you know, a huge thank you to Karen giving, oh, Seth, before we do this, Seth wanted to make a comment.
I'm sorry, I know it's getting late.
No,
It's going to be
please.
very brief. So with that, there's a few things, a few resources that I think are very helpful for people trying to find accurate information. Number one, if it's not a scientific article, mediabiasfactcheck.com is very powerful. It shows you left, right in terms of political skews. If you're looking for accurate information in terms of anything that we're looking for, PubMed, Google Scholar, or the actual library search does a fantastic job.
Okay.
And then even then you can go into the researchers in Google, you know, where are these guys from? Is it from the Hartford Institute, where it's a lot of potentially politically biased information? So I'd say start off with a good Google search and then media bias fact check anything anybody sends you. So that's all really quick. Thank you.
No, thank you. And again, appreciate your sharing.
Thank you guys. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Absolutely. So again, just a huge thank you to Karen. Karen has mentioned that she was very graciously has offered that we can share her slides. So I will get those to John and he can send those to those, because you registered using, he has a list of that. She also was gracious enough to let us record the session today. So we'll be able to share that. If there are people who missed it or just want to hear it again, we'll be able to share that. And again, you know, I would say just encourage you to keep looking for this. I do think there are going to be other things happening in the community that we would certainly could benefit from you folks being involved in that. So we'll keep putting that out there, pushing that out there, and look for those opportunities. John.
Thank you, Lindy. Just one of those opportunities could be through the Institute for Civic Engagement. Whether you're a student, whether you are in the community, please get in touch with me if you have an idea for a project. And this includes, as I say, students. So for example, Jess Falco is working with 2 other Institute for Civic Engagement interns on creating a stress management project for her colleagues on campus. We are all about initiative. We are all about creativity and collaboration on and off campus coming together. And so this is obviously such an important topic. We can make it happen project by project. And I'm happy to be the resource to bring folks together.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Excellent. All right.
Thank
Thank
you
you
all.
again. Huge thank you to Karen. Thank you, John, for taking the time to help coordinate all this. And you know what? I am very proud of the fact that we started on time and we are finishing on time. So you guys have a wonderful rest of the evening. I look forward to seeing all of you again in some other conversations. Thank you for your interest in this. So talk to everybody soon. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.